All right. All we need to deal with today is the idea of padding and margins with your divs. Now they're really simple, but they actually do they differ fundamentally in two really distinct ways. The first is that margins, the best way to describe them is that they're external and padding is internal. Does that make sense to everybody? Maybe? Yes? No? What we need to do, so we'll just do this right now, is I need to take care of my content and my footer divs. If you take a look at the text that's inside the content div right now, it's all the way over to the left, which is the div. But because of the way my graphic is, okay, there's a lot of empty space on the left there, and so I need to push my text over to the right so that it starts in here. And the reason for this extra space is because of the way the ribbon kind of comes around the left side here like this, okay? And then I have this extra space here. So I just need to push this over. So if I go to my CSS, I'm just going to take my content here, and let's just take a look. We'll play with these for a little bit, in a little bit so you can see this. So if I go to my box controls here, I have my padding and my margins. Now in order to set my div in the center of the page, you remember we talked about setting margins to auto for left and right. So what that means is I can't change the left and right margin to push this div over. And I wouldn't want to do that with the margin anyway. And the reason for that being is even if I could keep it centered and then also push it over, if I adjusted my margin, it's going to push the whole thing over, including the background image. In order to illustrate that, let's play with the top margin. So I'm going to take my top margin here and I'm going to add 20 pixels of margin to it. And you can see what happens. You see that? All of a sudden I get a gap between the content div and the header. And the reason for that is because when I add that margin, it adds space in between the two divs. It's an external space. However, if I take that away, see everything kind of moves back together, but then I add 20 pixels of padding, now you'll notice that all of a sudden my content, or the text, has dropped down very nicely, and it gives me a little bit of space between this. So the padding is internal space. Now, here's a very, very important thing that you also have to realize, though, with this. If I take and add padding to a div, one of the things it could mess you up. Okay, right now it added 20 pixels of padding all the way around. So let's just say OK for that for a second. Save it, and then let's preview it in Safari and see what happens. Notice something's happening here because of the padding. Now my divs don't line up anymore. Well, here's the problem. Whenever you add padding, and margins technically too, although with margins it's more obvious and it's a little less important. But whenever you add either of those two things, you actually are also adding to the width of the box or the div. So let's say I don't want 20. Let's just go here and let's just add some padding to the left. So I probably need to add, let's see, try 45 pixels of padding to the left. Nope, it's got to be more than that. There we go. So that looks pretty good. So here's my content div. Now I've added 85 pixels of padding to my left, to the left of the div. Now what's going to end up happening is, notice how the box that's Dreamweaver is showing me over here on the right is now longer. That's because I've just added 85 pixels of width to the div itself as well. So even though it still says 1250 for my width, it's not anymore. It's 1250 plus 85. Does that make sense? Because I've added that padding, the padding adds to the width. So if I go and save it and go preview in Safari, it's all messed up. And the reason why it's messed up is because it can't center the div the same way anymore. In order for them to be lined up, they have to be the same size. So, what do I have to do you think, in order to get it to line up again? It's actually really simple. Anybody hazard a guess? Yeah. There you go. Just subtract 85 from the div's dimensions. So I go into content, I go to my box here. If I've got 85 pixels here, I subtract 85 from 1250. So I'm going to have 1165. I'm dyslexic today, sorry. Thank you. That'll certainly change things. Now you can see how it lines up perfectly here. I click OK. I'm going to save. And now everything should line up. Yay! Really simple. Okay? But it's really important to understand that. Now, the other thing that I'm looking at here, also in order to line things up, is what does all my text line up down along the left here. Now, I'm not going to put content in the header, the title area here. I'm going to put PNGs with my name in really big letters and so on and so forth. So that doesn't really matter, honestly. But if I do want things to line up right down along the side here, I need to watch that, because this actually probably needs to be pushed over just a little bit more then for these to be lined up. The C's and stuff should be lined up. Now I need to do the same thing to my footer. And the nice thing is that the math is all the same. So if I take my footer, go to the box, uncheck that, take my left, and I need to add 85 pixels, and then go to 1165 and apply. Now everything should work out just fine. Now let's just test this a little bit more here. What I always like to do is just some gobbledygook letters here. I want to test how far across this is going to go, because I have some other problems. Oh, you see my problem here? What happens when it gets all the way over to the right? Is it staying where it should? No, because I haven't changed the padding on the right side either, and I really don't want it to go over here. Now, I could experiment, but what I also know is I should probably stick it right about this, right about in line with the corner piece here, maybe a little bit over. So if I just go to my right corner here, I can see it's 80 pixels. So if I take my content and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go back to the box, let's take our right padding. Instead of 80, let's try 70 pixels. Now, notice what happened. Very little, at least from the text is concerned, because it added that 70 pixels to the width of the box, and so it didn't really push the text in yet. But if we take that 70 pixels out of here, so we'll have 1095, that's a little extreme, I think. Let's try 60 pixels and go to 1105. Okay, so now what I'm noticing is what's happening here is I've got a bad spacing in this word here, and it's not really letting me see exactly where my... So what I probably want to do here is just do a... Okay, so just do a couple letters that are individually spaced. Now I can see where that padding really takes effect. So it's still not quite enough. Let's go somewhere in between. So if I take my content now, let's go back to the box, and we'll say 65 padding and exactly 1100. Didn't do much, did it? So I'm going to go back to my 70. I like that. That's going to be just about perfect. Give me about the same width over here as over here. I could probably even move this over 90 and then take that to 1090. Give myself a little bit more on the left. See, it's give and take, literally. Now I click OK, and things look pretty good. Let's just test it. And again, this is the kind of thing where you've got to start testing in Safari a lot, just because you'll never know. Oh, we have a problem here. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Did I set a margin and not know it? I don't think so. I also noticed I've got a little bit of a gap up here too. The page margins haven't been set to 0, and if you don't do that, there's always a little gap in at the top. So let's see here. What's wrong with my content? That it's giving me margins set to 0 on the top. What if I just did nothing? And then also my page properties, let's take my margins on the top. There we go. Apply that. Click OK. Let's save and see what it looks like. Okay, well the top looks a lot better, but the bottom still, something is still wrong. Sometimes you have to just put in zeros, I guess. Let's put in a little bit of padding on the top anyway. Maybe that's causing troubles. I don't know. There we go. So it just needed some padding along the top. That's kind of weird how that works sometimes, but there we go. So margins, just for review really quickly, margins separate the space between divs. So it literally gives you space around your div. It'll push a div away from another. Padding gives you extra space inside the div. So if you want to move text over, if you want to move, let's say you've got another div inside a div and you want to push that over in a direction, you can do that with the padding. The important thing to realize is that both of them will add to the dimensions of the box. So if your box needs to stay the same, especially if you're centering it like this, you need to then shrink the size of the box equal to how much you just increased the margin or the padding, and in that same dimension as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, and that's how you get your padding to start looking like that, or the text to start looking like it's in the box. Give it a little bit of space. It reads a lot better. If my text was right up against the black outlines of the web page here, if it was right up against this, it wouldn't look very good. That's why we have margins on our papers. When you write a paper for English or anything like that, you add margins. It just gives you a little bit of a buffer zone or a border zone between your text and the outside of your page, basically. So margins are really, really important. And giving your stuff space is really important. So padding and margins are one of the ways you can really decide to do that. Okay? All right?